We have Joe Rice from Oath Keepers. He's up in Malheur Forest, Burns, Oregon. And he's a 3%er or Oath Keeper or both? Oath Keeper. Are you there, Joe?
Yes, I am.
Well,
Hi,
very good. Hey, thanks for coming on the show. Good morning. Wow, what's been going on? What's the latest up there? We've been following this down here, with, just intense, what do we got here?
Yeah, we've all just been kind of watching and hoping you could kind of give us a brief overview as the situation as it stands. We've been involved in watching what's going on and trying to spread the truth of what really happened with the Hammonds and the different situations with BLM and the land that's going on out there. And we'd love to hear kind of a brief overview as the situation as it stands on the ground right now.
Yeah, sure. As everyone hopefully is aware of the Hammonds' plight, Dwight and Steve Hammond, the Hammond family, are ranchers in eastern Oregon. They've been in the Burns and Harney County since the 60s. And it seems that Dwight Hammond has had continuous issues with the Bureau of Land Management. His ranch sits next to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge on one side, and then on the other three sides, it's surrounded by the Bureau of Land Management managed land. So it's been a constant battle with the Hammonds and BLM. In early 2001, they had some lightning fires, and the Hammonds lit backfires to protect their ranch. And again, there was allegations of them starting arson fires. Harney County investigated it, never filed charges for lack of evidence. The state of Oregon investigated it. They did charge them, but then dropped the charges, lack of evidence. And then about 2 years later, and this has all happened, in 2012, 13, such like this, the Hammonds were charged with 19 different counts from the federal government. U.S. Attorney Frank Papagni dropped those charges down to 9, and they were convicted basically on a count of arson each. Judge Hogan, who was a presiding judge, sentenced both Hammonds to prison. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. Arson, under the United States Criminal Code and Federal Code, is under the Domestic Terrorism and Death Penalty Act. And so in his sentencing, Judge Hogan stated he felt sentencing the Hammonds to 5 years in prison was cruel and unusual. He would not do it because he felt it was a violation of their Eighth Amendment, because there were ranchers protecting their ranch land from fire. They set backfires to protect their grazing land from cattle. So he gave Dwight Hammond 90 days, and he gave Steve Hammond, Dwight's son, 366 days. They went to prison, and they served that in their entirety and then came home. They've been home for a year and a half, almost 2 years, when Amanda Marshall, who was the U.S. Attorney for Oregon, made the very rare request for reconsideration of sentencing to the 9th District, and it went to Judge Aiken out of Eugene, and Judge Aiken turned around, said the Hammonds' original sentence by Judge Hogue was quote-unquote illegal, and she said they had to go back to prison for the entire 5 years, credit for time served. That happened in October of 2015, and the Hammonds surrendered to federal prison in Southern California on January 4th. One of the things is Amanda Marshall has now resigned as the U.S. Attorney in Oregon because she's currently under investigation for a hostile work environment, for basically stalking a coworker. So there appears to be dysfunction within the U.S. Attorney's office in Eugene.
She's also implicated in the Kitshopper email scandal with Tom Steyer and helping to cover that up.
Yeah, and so we're watching those that should be enforcing and supporting the law themselves break it. So you have to question what is their ethical standard, where's their moral compass in this situation. I mean, ranching is not an easy life. It's hard work. The Hammonds, if you go through the community, are well supported. They're bedrocks of the community out there in Burns and Harney County. And everyone you speak to believes this is improper. You know, Lincoln once said, the people are the masters of Congress and the courts. And watching the Hammonds go back to prison after they had already sentenced the original sentence in its entirety by the judge, you know, you look at Fifth Amendment, you know, the Constitution says, we call it double jeopardy, but it actually states, shall not be put twice into jeopardy of life or limb.
Yeah, which they have.
So then the Hammond's back a second time seems to do exactly that. And Dwight Hammond, a 74-year-old rancher, that is cruel and unusual. Most of the Hammond family, and a lot of folks believe it's a death sentence for Dwight going into federal prison. So we held a support rally out in Burns, Oregon, for the Hammonds. It was a Saturday before they were supposed to surrender on Monday. And we went by the Hammond house. We laid down flowers and cards or letters of encouragement to the Hammond family. We had close to 500 people that attended that support rally to draw attention to it. Some of the frustration in this is, you know, I'm also the Josephine County Coordinator for Oath Keepers, but I'm one of the founding members of the Pacific Patriot Network. And with that, we sponsored this, and we went out and we, since October, have been working out there, late September, early October. You know, we've interviewed the Hammonds, we've interviewed Sheriff Dave Ward, we've actually gone out and interviewed Frank Capagni, the United States Attorney as a prosecutor. We've got all the court transcripts and documents and really looked at this thing hard.
Yeah.
And we see some huge oversteps and just things were done wrong by the federal government. You know, the Hammonds were sentenced and served their prison term in its entirety, and now they're being sent back to prison. That is so incredibly rare in America. You look at Fifth and Eighth Amendment violations. One of the big things is when they were going back to prison the second time, the Bureau of Land Management negotiated with the Hammonds to obtain first right of refusal if they ever chose to sell their ranch.
Yeah.
And our belief is that was so they could be guaranteed the federal prison of their choice. So there's been some leveraging on the federal government into what is an atrocious situation. So as we go back to the support rally, at the end of that, you know, Almond Bundy had been involved in this, and they decided to take a harder stand, and they went out to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge and occupied it. That was completely unbeknownst to us. We had no idea it was going to happen until it did. Because after the support rally, what we did is we were going to the fairgrounds to hold a town hall style meeting to educate the folks of Harney County as to what they could do to help the Hammonds, what options the Hammonds had for them in either, you know, clemency, pardon, or petitioning the Bureau of Prisons for compassionate release of Dwight Hammond. We had been out there previously, and we got them formed up with their committee of safety, and that takes on a structure like a school district or a fire district or a water district. It becomes a government entity where you have representation of the people that vote, you know, make their voice heard to county government. So, you know, doing everything legally and lawfully. We denounced Hammonds' stance in how he took over the refuge and what occurred. What's interesting, though, is that he is touching on an important message. And that message was seen when Congressman Greg Walden from the House floor, what was supposed to be a 5-minute speech turned into almost a 25-minute speech, and he vented his frustration dealing with BLM, specifically when he had the Steens Mountain Compact, where he had put together a coalition of government and ranchers where they had come to consensus on how to manage that area. BLM was the implementing agency, and immediately the bureaucracy and those people within BLM that perpetuate that bureaucracy went a completely different direction. They went the way they wanted to go. And when Congressman Walden was explaining to him that was not the intent, they challenged him as like, well, we don't believe that. Of course, he says, I'm the one that wrote the law. I know what the intent was. But it still resulted in them digging out all of their documents when they put the statute together. So if you look at Congressman Walden, a sitting U.S. Congressman's frustration that he showed, you can only imagine the frustration of the ranchers out there in Harney County or in Eastern Oregon. And what we're seeing is this is a problem not just in ranching, in mining. We had the Sugar Pine Mine situation here in Josephine County, and again, it was BLM. The whole situation out in Harney County, BLM. So it's a land use issue in the West. You know, when Oregon has 54% of its land managed by federal agencies, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, and you look at Massachusetts, which has less, well, I think it's 0.4%, you know, less than 1% is federally managed land. There's a huge difference. And part of it, when you look at economics, when people are trying to gain permission to utilize the natural resources these lands provide for the community's economic health, to take care of their families, and they're constantly told no, or they're constrained and constricted, frustration boils up. And I think that's what we have seen out there on the refuge. Unfortunately, the media narrative has been atrocious. You know, they called it an armed takeover. The visual image of armed takeover is a bunch of guys going in with guns and physically taking it over. And that's absolutely not what happened. They went out there on a Saturday night to an empty refuge with all the buildings open. They have occupied it. I mean, we have seen through American history occupations take place. I mean, if Rosa Parks hadn't sat in the bus seat, if there hadn't been lunch counters staged in, sit-ins, we wouldn't have the change in civil rights. And, you know, civil disobedience is kind of an American value, if you will. If you really want to get something changed, you stand up and draw attention to it. And, this is what Hammonds done. The way he did it, not appropriate, but the message that's now being focused on is appropriate. What happened to the Hammonds is wrong. Our system should not allow that to Americans that work hard. The land use issue that's coming out is very important that people look at this. It has to change. After the Sugar Pine Mine, we wrote a letter to Congressman DeFazio, and we requested an inquiry or investigation into BLM's management style and practices and the abuses of Americans. Well, that's over 8 months ago, and to date, Congressman DeFazio has not answered a letter. He's just ignored it. So when you have elected representatives, when you have government agencies that ignore the people, their public service, the people they're supposed to be working for, they ignore them, these types of actions they shouldn't be surprised by. So as Hammonds has been out there on the refuge, what happened is naturally there was a response from the federal authorities, the FBI primarily, and Harney County. We had concerns when we spoke with Sheriff Dave Ward. We told him if something was to occur or happen with the Hammonds, that they had to be ready for some type of eventuality, because a lot of people felt it was unfair. So as things have moved along, Hammond has focused on the land use issues, the ranching, and what's been interesting is the tide has turned a different direction now, where people, locals, are supporting the message, because he's drawing attention to the abuses of actually county officials. Judge Grasky out there is appearing to be terribly corrupt.
Yep.
And also the federal side of things with what's occurring and how allotments are. Part of the problem is Harney County and Burns, 50% are employed by the federal government. And you have what's called a fire economy that started out there. So people, and I've never been in an area, are fearful of speaking up or exercising their First Amendment rights to redress grievance because of reprisatory action by the federal agencies. Ranchers have told story that they challenged BLM, the grazing allotments, and spoke out publicly when they went back to renew them the next year. They were no longer available, or the paperwork was lost. So that seems to be a common practice. Recently I was told a story about there's a rancher that lives 3 miles from the refuge. For 10 years, the refuge has been attempting to purchase his ranch. He doesn't want to sell it. Their business model is they have older animals, cattle and horse. Well, the refuge manager was poking around his ranch. He went into Burns to Judge Grasky, and Judge Grasky issued an animal neglect warrant for him. Now, the previous sheriffs went out and arrested them and put them in jail for 89 days. And during that 89 days, the sheriff's son cared for those animals at $500 per day. They came to a settlement, and then they liquidated all the animals to pay the fine, and they've gone back out onto their ranch. The person that was carrying the titles, an owner carried title on the mortgage, said, I'll give you your deposit back, and you guys can get a fresh start. They came to find out that they were so generous in that because the refuge had already made a deal with them to purchase the ranch and absorb it into part of the refuge. So you have to have some pretty strong questions is, how can a sheriff have his son charge some poor people $500 a day while he's testifying against them? And the judge is overseeing all of this. So those are some of the things that are coming out. One of the big things that came out in defense of the Hammonds is people go into that refuge, and there is a firefighting group of ranchers that put themselves together like a little fire district to help each other on lightning-caused range fires to protect grasslands. And they had eyewitnessed this backburn. And they witnessed BLM on either side of the Hammond Ranch light a fire in a horseshoe shape, and the Hammonds come out and light backfires to protect their ranch. They did this right up against the ranch boundary. And Frank Papagni interviewed this witness and then never spoke to him again. And then we believe what we're finding out is they never in discovery provided the existence of this witness to the Hammonds, which would exonerate them. There's also a video that's come to light, but we've had federal authorities go out and threaten those people that they don't need to get involved in the middle of this. If they do, they'll confiscate their firefighting equipment. You probably saw last week where the militia and others were getting a bad rap. There's all these threats. Well, it was the FBI going around posing as militia. You see a traffic stop in town. It could be a license plate blank that's out, and you'll see 2 or 3 or more law enforcement vehicles on that traffic stop.
Are you aware, Joe, of the article that came out yesterday with IntelliHub about the Clinton Foundation and the publicly owned lands and the uranium? And my understanding is up there's a lot of minerals on all that land, and it seems like this is a land grab by the powers that be, and it kind of feathers into everything you're saying right now.
We are aware of that Clinton Foundation, and actually some of that came out of our intelligence team about 3.5 weeks ago. That came to light that the Clinton Foundation has been involved in a lot of these land purchases, and there's actually a assay report of the Hammond Ranch where it is rich in uranium and gold.
Wow. And
that's out there. So it does appear to be a land grab.
Have you guys come across the connection with Tom Steyer and the geothermal group and the geothermal vents and the things that are going on out there as well?
No, not yet. They're doing a lot of research. What we did is the Pacific Patriot Network went in as a buffering force. Right now, out at the Burns Airport, there is a substantial presence of a federal, FBI tactical team. In the courthouse, they've made it into a fortress. They put cyclone fencing around it. There's 25 to 30 federal agents or more in there daily.
Wow.
The tactical team has expanded their footprint at the Burns Airport, and so our concern became we don't want to see a Wacoing type of event.
Sure. Yeah.
And so we placed ourselves kind of in the middle as a neutral spot. And the intent of that neutrality is we have tactical teams, and we basically have told all sides, stay on your side of the fence. We'll be the fence. We want to see this resolved peacefully. It has to have an open dialogue. Some of the issues we've been working with on the last few weeks is we were able to get Hammond and Sheriff Ward on that road to start a dialogue. Unfortunately, it didn't go anyplace. The PPN then drafted articles of resolution based on their talking points at press conferences and presented that as a foundation to start resolution from. Again, that went nowhere. This past Wednesday, I actually drove to Salem and presented a request to the governor's office, Governor Brown's office, that she send a mediator to Burns to moderate a dialogue to resolution. We find it very odd, 3-4 weeks into this, going into this fourth week, that the federal, the county, or the state have not offered any type of mediator to help moderate this discussion. You probably saw finally Hammond started speaking with the FBI. We had put that together through some back channels and got him over there to start a dialogue, an open dialogue. But at this point, we look at Governor Kate Brown's complete and total leadership failure. She had an opportunity to provide mediation, and the only thing she did was turn around and throw all of it with state sovereignty down the toilet to the federal government. She says, this is your problem. You should have fixed it by now, and I want my $100,000 per week paid back to us. And, that's vastly different than we see the governor of Texas, who's demanding BLM leave his state. So, unfortunately, that's occurred. And now, as we continue down the path, there is dialogue going on finally. There is discussion. But these issues with the Clinton Foundation and other things, if we look at the Bureau of Land Management, and these are legal papers, you can actually see they're a registered corporation in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
We have the situation at the Bundy Ranch. We've had the Sugar Pine Mine. We've had the situation in Eastern Oregon, as always the Bureau of Land Management. And it always seems to be the same continuous issues. How Congress doesn't act on an investigation looking at their practices, why this discussion is not taking place, it's frustrating and confusing to a lot of people.
Why don't they pull their funds? That's been destroyed. Congress has the power of the purse. They have not used it at all. They have acquiesced and knuckled under and given, everything to these guys at every turn, and even after they took over the Congress and the Senate. It's just, it's unbelievable.
It is. And, when you have these 1,200 plus page bills for funding, they're working on continuing resolution, you would think the power of the purse string, as you say, that's what I was taught in my civics class, you simply defund them.
Right.
Or you defund certain parts of their operations would make sense. But, in 1946, they had the Administrative Procedures Act was put into place, and Congress kind of gave away a lot of their authority. And what I mean by that is these agencies, the bureaucracy, started making their own rules and regulations. And they go out into the public, go out onto our lands, and they tend to enforce them as if they were law.
Yep.
And they're not. They're civil. They're rule and regulation. And then they start funding themselves or forming police forces or tactical forces. There's no place in the Constitution or anything else that says the BLM should have its own law enforcement or the FBI or the IRS.
Or powers of prosecution.
For that matter, the wildlife.
Anything.
For that matter, you got the wildlife guys, the Fish and Game. You got the you got the Forest Service. All of a sudden, these guys all have police powers.
Well, and that's it. When I met with Mr. Rapagni, he stated, he says, we used to go after drug cartels, and then it was organized crime. He says, today everything's domestic terrorism. And the problem with these agencies is the culture within them becomes everybody's a domestic terrorist. And when people are going out using our public lands and they're recreating and they're treated like criminals in their own country, there's a culture within these agencies that has to change. It's got to stop. That's inappropriate. There is not a terrorist behind every tree. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan. I fought the war of terror. I understand what a terrorist looks like. and is not a rancher in Eastern Oregon.
Well, if anything,
that's not a terrorist.
If anything, the populace, the people, are being terrorized by our own government at this point.
We experience it down here in the state of Jefferson regularly as well. We have very serious issues with land use, and for us, it's a little bit different of a deal because not only do we get it from BLM, but our own state government out of Sacramento goes above and beyond what BLM does to us and hammers us. And as you said, it's a cultural change, a shift in mindset that has to occur. We're being stamped out.
Well, it's not to the level of terrorism at this point, but it's the us against them mentality from the agency's points of view.
Well, it is, and you have to look at the producers, and there's nothing in our lives that doesn't come out of the dirt, be it mineral, be it grown, whatever it is. It's what enriches our lives. And what we've seen in the West, it started with the timber industry. We can't touch timber.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here in Josephine County, a few months back, they withdrew 101,000 acres of minerals in the entire Illinois Valley. We're seeing miners throwing off their claims, timber. Now it's after ranchers. There's the attack on the producers, those that produce things to make our lives better, more fulfilled. Any nation, its strength comes from its ability to manufacture and produce items. And they're being constrained to a point where how are we going to continue to consume if they can't produce?
That's right.
Well, there's some of us that have looked at this situation, and I'm one of them that have done some investigation and seen some of the things that have gone on some of these reserves and things. As an example, the Oak Bottom Reserve down in Arizona, where the Apache Reservation has now had 5,000 acres of their land seized and handed over to the foreign corporation. It's not that these lands are not going to be put into use. They're not going to be put into use for Americans. They're being put into use for foreign corporations and forest interests. And some of us are almost wondering if these lands haven't quietly been set aside in backroom deals as securement for our debt.
That's a discussion we've had up here, is when we're looking at the richness of our natural resources in timber and mineral in all these areas, it appears to be the collateral for our foreign debt. We're kind of on the edge of the plank here with these continuous resolutions. I mean, there is nothing backing our economy. It's a illusion that we're financially doing well, and if we're not producing something, we can't show wealth, we can't show product. I mean, what do you have? And so the only thing we can leverage right now and show are those raw natural resources in timber and in mineral, and then in ranching. I mean, as you said earlier, the Hammond Ranch, with this assay report that we have, shows underneath that ranch, next to the reserve, uranium and gold.
Well, and if we lose our ability to manufacture, and with the dollar and the worldwide, monetary system collapsing right now, we haven't seen it as much in the dollar as we're going to. If we don't have our natural resources to produce things, we're going to be subjugated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in Josephine County, we've lost timber, we're losing mining. We're in a situation where we're surrounded by all these resources, and it's a look but don't touch.
Yeah.
And in the state of Oregon, our economy is at the bottom. I mean, we're just under everybody. And part of it is we've had all the sawmills and things closed. It's not been replaced by anything else. It hasn't been replaced by a tourism type economy or something else. We've always been a producing, manufacturing type in the timber industry. So as you look at one of the things, when I was out there, I personally witnessed a rancher came up, and the guy was in tears. And out in Malheur County, there's a proposed national monument. Now, Eastern Oregon is Eastern Oregon. It is sage, it is scrub, but that's what it is. So there's 400 ranches now being threatened by this national monument. And this gentleman said, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and I have ranched. I don't know how to do anything else. It's all I know. And he's in his mid to late 50s, and he's looking at how he provides for his family, and everything just arbitrarily removed. Because somebody said, okay, today that's your ranch, tomorrow it's a national monument, we have to protect it from you, the producer.
Yeah, the person who has cared for it for generations.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the things that with the Hammonds situation, the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge did a study on migratory waterfowl. And she used their own government scientific study where they come to the conclusion that the wildlife refuge was not healthy for migratory waterfowl because it didn't have the feed sources. The reason was all the ranches around them, privately owned, were burning off the rangelands for regeneration of grass and seed for cattle. All the migratory waterfowl were going to the ranchers because the land was better maintained and managed than the refuge. So, you know, with the national view, when you say wildlife refuge, people think this nice, pristine protection of wildlife, birds, animals. Well, they've been so aggressive in suppressing fire, there's no food sources, so they're going to the surrounding ranchlands to do it because they do a better job at land management. And, you know, they'll throw study after study after study, and Susie Hammond brought this to light. She showed that the wildlife refuge was failing in its mission of land management because wildlife was not landing there in their migratory patterns. They were going to the outside ranches and doing it. And so that, of course, was embarrassing. And then we started finding other things. The BLM area manager and the Malheur National Wildlife Manager just happened to be husband and wife.
Did you know that the lady that you're speaking of, the wildlife manager, is now the head of the Department of Climate Policy in California?
No, I did not know that. That's
new. She came down here to Sacramento and is now working for Jerry Brown as his head of climate policy.
Well, it seems like we have a submarine type of a movement inside the EPA and these environmental agencies, whether it's climate change or shutting down the forest through the EPA or save all the trees. I mean, this is all about controlling the land. It's not about saving the trees or the birds.
And controlling the people.
It's control it, because if you control the land, you control the people.
Yeah.
It's about money and control.
Yep.
Yeah, we're just going over so many things that is just unbelievable. You know, the servers, the email server from Clinton's her private server is starting to release information on, this stuff on Gaddafi and the gold-backed currency. These guys, this criminal organization, just seems like it's a worldwide deal. And everything seems, they got their fingers in
it's Clinton.
Every pie,
yeah.
It seems like. It's just unbelievable. And the more stuff that comes out, I mean, if the American people aren't getting mad, I mean, then I tell you, we don't have any hope. But I think the wake-up call is starting to come here. So we've got Joe from Oath Keepers on the line with us, and we kind of wanted to button this up. And if you've got anything to get out there, Joe, now's the time to do it. We got about 10-15 minutes left with you before we have to move on. But boy, I'll tell you what, you can't make this stuff up, can you?
No, and one of the things that we have to remember, this started with the Hammonds. And, we live in the United States of America, and we have a Constitution. Those protect the individual rights. And some of the atrocities and injustice we've seen with this is the Oregon State Constitution affords the Hammonds protections. Kate Brown can request of the federal government that the Hammonds be returned to the state of Oregon while they look into and investigate the potential violation of their Fifth and Eighth Amendment rights by the U.S. Attorney and the courts. With Mr. Papagni, the one thing that we were guided on, to his credit, is I think he felt that the original sentence of the Hammonds was fair and just. But this goes and brings into discussion, as Greg Walden did on the House floor, sentencing minimums and mandatory minimums. And why do we have judges when judges can't be judges, and we have a 74-year-old man that is sent to prison for protecting his ranch land? And part of this goes with prosecutorial discretion that was never exercised. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to charge the Hammonds, but they did. What I find interesting is after the county refused to do it, the state refused to do it, the federal government came in and says, we're going to do it.
Well, where in the Constitution can anyone show me where the United States Congress has reserved the federal authority to determine a sentence in a criminal case for anyone, anytime?
Well, exactly. And, and where was the victim here? These are generational ranchers that have been doing this for years. And look what's happened here. One of the things, why is BLM negotiating first right of refusal to purchase their ranch?
Because they want it.
They don't have any reason to take it by eminent domain. So these are things that have been going on with the Hammonds. The system seems to have been orchestrated to get them off their land, and they've been somewhat successful in it. One of the things that can be done is to support the Hammond in maintaining that ranch. We're working on getting feed and hay donated and labor donated to keep the Hammond Ranch running while, Dwight and Steve are in prison. One of the things we can do is, petition the Bureau of Prisons for compassionate release of Dwight, as he's not in the graves of health, nor is his wife, with the stress they've endured on this. Also clemency.
Well, there is a petition.
One of the questions that I have is on that paperwork. It says, "We the people of the United States of America" versus Dwight and Stephen Hammond. We, the people, are the ones that technically brought suit against the Hammonds. Why cannot we, the people, afford them clemency?
Excellent question. And that's what it says. As Lincoln said, we're the masters of the court in Congress. And that's one of the things that I think we need to bring pressure to bear on Judge Aiken in Eugene by protest at the courthouse or even in front of her home. They have no issues coming into our homes, knocking on our doors, trespassing on our lands. I think there has to be ownership for this action. And these judges and these attorneys and prosecutors tend to live in their own little microcosm of a world completely devoid of any understanding of what's going on around them. And they kind of perpetuate their own system, slapping each other on the back, look at a good job we did, not realizing the majority of the community, it's not our value. That's not how we believe. I don't feel how America or Harney County is any safer by sending a 74-year-old man to prison, back to prison. I think it's atrocious that he is sent back to prison. At what point, how is this not double jeopardy? I was told by the time it goes to the courts and is challenged, their time would have been served. Well, why? Why can we not protest as a people, protest the courts, protest their decision, challenge them on the double jeopardy? When the Constitution was written, it was written to be understood by the common man. And now we have attorneys interpreting us and telling us what it meant. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand when it says shall not be put twice into jeopardy of life or limb. Going back to prison, I can count one time, two times. That's twice. Mm-hmm. Understood by the common man. Cruel and unusual. Sentencing Dwight Hammond or the Hammonds to 5 years was cruel and unusual, but sending a 74-year-old man back to prison and his son back to prison after they completed their initial prison terms, no, that's not right. And when you look at what they did, what did they do? What happened? We have videos, and they're out there on the web. People can look at them, where the BLM is lighting fire. They're burning up fences. They're burning up power poles. They're burning down a house, and they're burning cattle alive. I don't see anyone there being prosecuted. Who goes out and burns cattle alive knowing they're out there? These are ranchers trying to protect themselves, protect their lands, protect their way of life, and now they're being called terrorists. Now they're being given 5-year mandatory minimums for a crime. When does Oregon State sovereignty come in and say, wait a minute, no, they didn't do anything wrong? So, what people don't understand is the Hammonds have spent upwards of $1 million defending themselves. The BLM assessed them with a $400,000 civil fine for burning 139 acres. You know how much ranch land in Harney County sells for? about $1,000 an acre. So they could have bought that land and owned it for life for $139,000. BLM in its court case said it was unusable for 2 years, but we're going to fine you $400,000.
Well, one of the things that got me is one of BLM's own officials during the trial testified that he couldn't qualify an amount of damages because the Hammonds burning the land had actually improved the value of it.
Yep, exactly.
I just, by the time you get done with this thing and you see how far outside the color of law your government is operating, it just, I don't know how anybody can not become wrathful over what's happened.
We got to cue up that video that you just had up, Bob, with Gavin there, and let's play that, and let's get a little comment on that before we run this.
I had one quick question from one of our people in the chat room. What was the response like to the Chris Ann Hall town halls up there? Were you there for that?
That was overwhelming. She spoke 2 different nights. The first night had a fairly good-sized crowd. The second night, it was almost triple the amount of people there. Very inspiring. She is a gifted speaker.
Yeah, she is.
What a lot of folks don't realize is Ammon came out, and Ammon actually attended both the Chris Ann Hall and the meeting afterwards. He's been out in town a number of times. He's not been arrested. No one's approached him. But after the second Chris Ann Hall speaking engagement, he had over 100 people line up to shake his hand. They have a constant stream of ranchers in there telling him their story. It's the same thing we had here at Sugar Pine. They were telling us, their BLM story. He's having that occur out there. 80% of the people on that refuge are locals. They're not from away or out of state. I mean, the media doesn't report it that way, but they have a tremendous amount of support for the attention they're bringing to the land use issues. And part of it is those people in Harney County are not just dealing with the BLM and its bureaucracy, but they're also dealing with corruption in their own government. And that's now starting to unravel. We were saying that, Judge Gratzky out there is not pissed because Ammon Bundy is sitting on the wildlife refuge occupying it. It's because there are 30-plus federal agents in the courthouse, and that's Gratzky doesn't want them in the courthouse. Hopefully those FBI agents that are in there will start looking at some records and start digging in some files and seeing what else is going on. So it's one of those things that people want to get involved. I mean, they can donate to help support, Pacific Patriot Network and what we're doing out there for work. And we fund guys with their, we reimburse for fuel, and we provide housing and meals. So if they come out and volunteer their time, they can sign a petition for the Hammonds. They can, write a letter to their elected congressman or state senator asking that the mandatory minimum sentences be done away with, that they not be mandatory minimums, but maybe guidelines. Put judicial discretion back into the courts. I mean, you're always going to have good judges or bad judges, but, as you said earlier, we the people, we can't stand on the sidelines and say, hey, they're going to fix it for us. We have to be vocal about it. The court of public opinion can be very persuasive.
So, Joe, if somebody wants to donate, do you have like an address or, a website or something that they can go to so people can help out the Hammonds?
Sure. Yeah, we have, it's actually PacificPatriotsNetwork.com. We keep that updated regularly as to what's currently happening, where it's occurring, what's going on with the refuge. There's the ability to donate through that website. But the one thing I have to let everyone really know is if we post it on the website, it is accurate and vetted information.
Absolutely.
We do not deal in rumor. We don't deal in gossip. When we post information, our intelligence team has thoroughly investigated it, and they will have documentation and documents backing up anything we post.
Okay. And then also, if there's people up there around that area that want to bring something out, whether it's feed or something for the Hammonds Ranch or whatever, is there a phone number on that website for them to get a hold of somebody to do that? To actually,
it's a contact. It's called Volunteer at Pacific Patriots Network, and if they send an email explaining what they're offering, if feed or labor, we will put them in touch with who they need to be in touch with.
Okay, great.
We don't put out phone numbers because our phones just blow up.
Oh, I bet.
And so with the email side of it, we have someone that's constantly monitoring and responding to that. If they want to come out and help, it's a way to come out and help in any manner they want to, by donation, by supplies, by physical persons, by feed for the ranch. Just tell us what you're looking to help with, and we will get it to the right person.
And that's all under contact information at Pacific Patriots Network, and that's the volunteer coordinator, his email address.
Correct, exactly.
I have another question from our listeners, too. Is there anybody that's putting money on the Hammonds books in prison for their commissary and things like that?
I don't know. I believe there was a question early on with that, and let me ask that question, and we'll put it up on the website, because I know there was an ability to donate for their commissary privileges in the prison. The one thing I would really encourage listeners to do is write a letter. Write a letter to the president requesting clemency. Write a letter to the Bureau of Prisons requesting compassionate release. That was one thing we were told by the prosecutor is online petitions and letters, they look at those. They bear a lot of weight. They want to look and measure what the temperature of the climate and the community are. And if they're not finding support on this, they start leaning towards those issues.
Maybe you could have something posted on the website that gives us the address to the prison, because I wouldn't have any idea which prison to write to in Oregon.
No, they're actually in Southern California, which I'm pretty sure has to make it Lompoc.
Yeah, maybe we can find that out and get it posted someplace. Yeah. And
I will get that information out and post it as to where letters can be sent to in support. Anything that we can do there on the plight of the Hammonds. The other thing is requests, the FBI launch an investigation into prosecutorial misconduct of the Hammonds.
Absolutely.
Why was critical evidence that probably exonerates them withheld from the defense? And, it's one of those things where you look at this and realize that there was not any integrity in the prosecution. It was orchestrated. Amanda Marshall requesting it. There are three opportunities for them to say, hey, we prosecuted the Hammonds, we accepted the judgment, and that's just the way it is. And that's what the judge decided to do. You leave it and move on. They could have done it. Amanda Marshall could have done that. The Ninth Circuit could have done it. Judge Aiken could have just not chosen to send them back to prison. But part of the game, and it's a game to them, is they're going to have to fight for their rights. They're going to have to fight to have the Fifth Amendment and Eighth Amendment violations looked at and reviewed. So Amanda Marshall's behavior and the situation she's in, she doesn't seem to be a very intelligent person. So I would venture to say that she was pushed from somebody someplace else to make that request for a review of the Hammonds sentence, because at the end of the day, they want the land.
There was a quote from her former boss. She used to be part of the district attorney's office in Coos Bay, and there was actually a quote from her boss directly that said she was let go because she was a moonbat.
Yeah.
And that was actually a public comment from her former employer.
Wow.
Yeah, see, and there we are. This is part of the thing, is if we don't demand good leadership. I mean, you look at what Governor Brown did this past week. She literally took the sovereignty of the state of Oregon, and she threw all leadership, all responsibility, and blamed the federal government for it.
Yeah, flushed it.
And that's just incredibly sad. Not willing to stand up and protect citizens of the state under the Oregon Constitution, blaming the feds for not having done this. I mean, part of its occupation, it's an American value. Civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience is an important thing. I mean, Eric Holder in the 70s took over a Navy ROTC protesting Vietnam War action, and he did it armed. He became the Attorney General of the United States. I mean, if Martin Luther King hadn't had the lunch counter sit-ins, if Rosa Parks had never sat at the front of the bus, those are constitutional rights that people exercise. It drew attention to issues that had to be addressed, resolved, and fixed. Hammond, I don't agree with the way that he took over the refuge, but he is drawing attention on an issue that needs to be fixed. We attempted to do it with Sugar Pine. We did everything, and we wrote Congressman DeFazio requested an inquiry investigation. 8 months, he's ignored it. So, as an elected representative, if you're going to ignore your constituents and you're not going to respond to concerns, it's not like I wrote the letter. There's thousands of people supporting and standing behind that letter, and you're going to ignore them. You should not be surprised when people act out in frustration. If you look at Greg Walden's speech and Congressman Walden's frustration from the House floor, you can only imagine the users or the people that live in these communities that have to deal with the bureaucracy of these agencies, where they're going. So people have to start speaking out. This is no longer the time to be sitting on the sidelines watching. You have to step on the field and participate. You have to make phone calls.
There is a website, too, that has a petition going called www.savethehammonds.com, and they have 27,300 people have already signed it. So you can go there. That's savethehammonds.com, and I think there's another one at the White House at this point as well, and I'll find that out here in just a second. But yeah, I think people are waking up, and I want to play this video clip too after we get off here of Gavin and this Gavin C. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but let's go ahead and play it, Bob, and then take a little bit of comment, and then we have a half an hour left here before we're off the air. But go ahead and play it, Bob, and right now, and then let's take comment afterwards. So here we go.
All right, this is just in from down in Oregon, and you need to understand what's happening down there. This is enormous. They're taking the public meetings that they've been having in the county, America. Judge Steve Grasty, the sheriff of the county, they're taking the public meetings, they're moving them to a ticket-only format where only approved people can be in there speaking at the public meetings. Are you hearing this? I'm not making this up. They released a press release, and they're taking the meetings from the school. The judge declared that the meetings will be moved to the school to the senior center, which can hold much less people. The maximum occupancy is now 150 people. You have to have a ticket to get in. You have to be a Harney County resident to get in. You cannot have a gun. You must go through security. You must present ID. Everything is being controlled down in Harney County. And whether you live there or somewhere else, you need to understand the gravity of this bureaucratic terrorism. You should be getting angry right now because this is huge. We have the Patriots down in Oregon, and they're standing up for the rule of law. They're standing up for people's rights. They're trying to return the land to the people. They're doing so with principle and with peace. Now, they've been having these public meetings where they load the bases with loyalist people who will boo the Constitution and who will support and applaud the tyranny coming from these local officials and the judicial and bureaucratic terrorism coming from the federal government. People in these meetings, this has happened twice now, that brought up the Constitution. Not that caused a scene or that picked a fight or anything like that. Patriots that brought up the Constitution were physically removed by the sheriff. They were thrown out of these public meetings. Now, in order to have more control, they're taking these public meetings with public officials to a place, locking it down, saying you have to sign up for a ticket to get in. You have to show your ID. You cannot exercise your Second Amendment rights. And you have to comply by their rules. These aren't private people, folks. This is the judge of the county. This is the sheriff of the county. These are the county officials. This is tyranny, is what it is. Folks, we have a law. We have a rule of law in this nation. We have liberty. We have our God-given rights. And we have to stand up and do something about it. This nation is falling. Our children are becoming slaves as we speak. The front right now is down in Oregon. And a few brave men are standing up for the rule of law. And it's time to rise in support. It's time to expose to the world what these wicked men in Harney County, Oregon are doing. It's time to step up. Because if we don't do something, it's over.
Wow. pretty powerful stuff. I mean, and that's really what we're talking about, isn't it, Joe?
Well, yeah, and let me read you something, and this is when I spoke about the corruption. What he's speaking to there is Judge Grasky.
Mm-hmm.
And Judge Grasky came out and said tomorrow tickets will be available only to Harney County residents to have this meeting. And this is where Grasky in his comments to us and discussions have been, get out of my county. These are my buildings. This is my county. You have no problem to be here. Oregon law. This is the law. 192-630, meetings of governing body to be open to public. All meetings of the governing body of a public body shall be open to the public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting except as otherwise prescribed by ORS 192-610. So there you have it. There's the judge knowingly and willfully violating Oregon law.
Wow.
That is corruption.
Unbelievable,
When
this whole thing.
you have a judge who also sits as the lead county commissioner that is closing and restricting a public meeting only to county residents, it's illegal. He cannot do that. But here's the game. Rather than being called on it and challenged on it, it's they have the meeting and they'll deal with it afterwards. He can't do that. It's an ethics violation. It's a direct violation of the law. So what we do have, and it takes moral courage, is if you witness them committing the crime where you attempt to enter the meeting and they stop you from entering, then under the authority of Oregon statute, you can also arrest them for violation of the law. And it's an illegal act. So that's it. When you have people in decision-making, government is there to protect the people, not constrain. The Constitution constrains government, not the people.
Absolutely.
And here you have a situation where you have a tyrannical action by a corrupt judge who also is a county commissioner who is willfully violating Oregon state law for convenience. It doesn't work that way. Not in America. We don't have the ability to pick and choose the laws we want to adhere to and the ones we don't want to adhere to. We're a lawful nation.
Hey, Joe, could I ask you a real quick question, too? Sorry, but had something come across. Do you know if there's any truth to the fact that Sheriff Hammonds' wife's maiden name is Grasty?
Oh, Sheriff Ward, you mean?
Yeah, Sheriff Ward's
wife?
Yeah.
I don't. I have no idea of that. I don't know.
What would be the connection there?
What I do know is that,
Judge
we have
Grasky's
confirmed
daughter.
this, is Judge Grasky's brother in Vail County is a senior level manager with BLM.
Okay.
What we do know is the former sheriff before Ward, the BLM compound, is not owned or managed by BLM. It's actually on leased land owned by the former sheriff. So if you start having these things unwind, you know, one thing's leading to another thing. I find when any government entity attempts to constrain and deny transparency of a proceeding, they're hiding something. They don't want to be transparent. They don't want the truth to come out. There should be no fear of having open public meetings. There should be no fear of having any disclosure of public information unless you've been benefiting from it, and you're trying to hide that.
Well, in a way, is the government here kind of not backed into a catch-22, because the longer this situation continues, the more and more exposure it's getting, the more and more this corruption is just oozing out from under everything, under the spotlight. Yet at the same time, I don't think they can really act against the occupiers at the reserve without fear of lighting the West on fire.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at Oregon, you look Washington State this past year with wildfire, and the hundreds of millions of dollars spent in unmanaged forest health. You know, here we are, we're loving the land to death. We have these wildfires go through there, and they nuke them. There's nothing left. Baker County was destroyed by devastating wildfires because they don't manage the land. The ranchers out in eastern Oregon understand land management. They know how to do it. They're not working from some bureaucratic policy assembled in Washington, D.C. They're living it. generationally that experience is passed down from, father to son, father to son. And to have, that's the biggest issue we fight is when Hammond is making his case, and the same thing with the state of Jefferson, returning the land, it remains a public land, but it goes under local control. If you have land here in Josephine County and Harney County that is then managed by the county to the local values of the community for its economic health and done responsibly, that's a better deal. As long as it remains under federal control, anytime a grazing permit, a Christmas tree permit, a firewood permit is purchased, it goes to D.C. It doesn't recirculate into that community. And so they have no benefit of it. So that's the biggest thing is what is the issue about returning this to local control? If you look at Massachusetts, Maine, they have a tremendous amount of county and state lands, and they're still public lands. They're just managed locally. You don't see the devastating wildfires out east that you do out here. Why is that?
Well, that's because we're overstocked. We see it quite a bit here in Jefferson, where it has become a direct threat to livestock, to people, to homes. These wildfires. I grew up in a timber county. I know what a traditional wildfire looks like in a managed forest, and I know what they look like now. These things are hellish infernos that actually burn so hot. We've seen instances of where it's turning the soil into glass, where nothing will ever grow again. It's insane.
That Baker County had a devastating wildfire. One of the ranchers out there, he got on his cap. There were no federal resources that are out there fighting that fire. He got on his tractor and he started cutting fire line. The one person he interacted with from the federal government was a law enforcement officer for Bureau of Land Management who threatened to arrest him for destruction of public lands because he was cutting a fire break to protect his ranch. And his statement, he goes, "Why do I have to wait until that comes onto my ranch land and destroys my ranch land when you have no resources here? You, the federal government, should be doing this," and they weren't. So that's what's going on. You don't have anybody out there fighting it. You don't have them work with the local community, but they send out a law enforcement officer and threaten the guy with arrest for trying to protect his land. Same thing the Hammonds did. The Hammonds went out and lit backfires. Now, when you think about this, when they lit the backfires, they were protecting their ranch land from being burned over. They were protecting their livelihood, the ability to produce. 139 acres, 5 years in prison. They had a situation, and you have to look at malicious intent. There was nothing malicious about what they did. They were trying to protect their land and their property. Warm Springs, 2 years ago, they had the Warm Springs fire. It was maliciously set by an individual because her friends were firefighters sitting around bored with nothing to do. She intentionally started an arson start, 30,000 acres burned. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Here the Hammonds had 139 acres and were protecting their ranch from a BLM lit fire, and they get 5 years.
Well, I bet you $5 that there wasn't uranium over there in Warm Springs that was trying to be sold to the Russians and a global criminal organization involved in trying to steal their land. I mean, good grief. Yeah, it's crazy.
Exactly. I mean, so both of those were prosecuted apparently out of the same office in Eugene. So,
what's the difference?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, what's the difference? Hey, who's the sheriff appointed by up there? I mean, I thought all sheriffs at the county level were elected, but evidently I'm hearing that the sheriff is not elected up in those in that area. Who appoints them? The governor? Do you know?
No. What occurred is the former sheriff, when the Hammonds were sent back to prison, he resigned/retired, and so he appointed Dave Ward to continue as sheriff. And
the sheriff is elected, though. I mean, there's elections coming up then. I see.
Yeah, that election will be taking place this coming November. It's expected Dave Ward will not continue as sheriff. Dave Ward is going to be lucky if he can continue to live in Harney County with his atrocious conduct. I mean, that's one of the other things is when we spoke with him, we tried to get him to speak with former Sheriff Gilbertson, Sheriff Palmer, real sound constitutional sheriffs that have fought these issues with the BLM, with the Forest Service, and exercise the authority of a sheriff. The sheriff, as being the chief law enforcement officer of the county, is a very strong position. And the only way the federal government can come into that county and do what they're doing today is because Sheriff Ward gave him permission to. He could have simply said, nope, this is a county issue, we'll deal with it, thank you, but no thank you. And that would have been the end of it. But he opened the door and welcomed him in. It's become evident that the federal government has been running that investigation for the long term. They've been the ones acting out there. I mean, we've documented over 200 federal vehicles in Harney County, in Burns. They literally have a standing army out there, which elevates concerns about them trying to take some type of action. I mean, the statement's been there are no more free Wacos. You know,
well, how good of a grasp do you think the federal government understands that if there is a violent action taken against the people in the Malheur Reserve, that there absolutely will be a response?
I believe those on the ground locally absolutely do understand that, and they're the ones that are saying they want this peacefully resolved. The ones in Washington, D.C., clueless. They don't get it. They don't understand.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are sending the direction down. I mean, the PPN, we've been out there doing hearts and minds and winning over and talking. You know, we've interacted with law enforcement. We've interacted with the FBI.
Fantastic.
I mean, talking with them face-to-face, these are good people doing their jobs. They have families, they have lives, and they're where they should be. Working within the community, talking with everybody, understanding, people are becoming less fearful. The one statement that seems to come out is they're not fearful of the people on the refuge. They're fearful of the guys in the courthouse and at the airport.
Yeah.
They are the only ones that have had a very overt display of weapons, of body armor, of kit. I mean, I went up to give them a single piece of paper on the Articles of Resolution to try and get all sides talking, and we were met with 25, 30 fully tacked out guys, long guns, everything. I mean, they actually stacked on a building. They drew down on some of our people, then realized they were unarmed. So, you know, there's a misperception as to who we are, what we are, and what we're doing. I mean, today in America, if you stand up for a constitutional value and you do a nonviolent occupation or protest, you're met with overwhelming and intimidating. It's intimidating force. It's too bad. It's a detachment that the federal government doesn't understand values here in the West. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand the frustration. You know, when you go into any metropolitan area, I mean, after the governor completely handed everything over to the feds, she then went on to advocate for the minimum wage in Portland to be apt to raise to $15.57. Why is the governor involved in that? She wants that to hit Portland, but she's completely out of touch with the rest of the state of Oregon.
We wanted to keep Joe on because this is such good information to get out there for everybody to hear that, and I've got a whole bunch of other economic stuff that might have to wait till next week, but
it's going to have to. You're down to about 6 minutes,
but,
you know.
Let's hope the economy waits till next week.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure that we got a real problem in the economy. We got a little dead cat bounce going on a global meltdown, and this is all going to come to fruition. Boy, it just seems like it's all coming to a head at the same time, doesn't it, Joe?
It does. I mean, yeah, it absolutely does. I think 2016 is going to be a deciding year for our nation.
I agree. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. You know, maybe we can. Can we maybe cue that up, Bob? Maybe we can get this 2-minute Greenspan clip in.
But before we go to that, I want to thank Joe, just in case we run out of time. And thank you so much for coming on and giving us all the good information and letting us know what's going on and what's really happening up there in Oregon. We appreciate it.
Started at 12, Bob.
And I wanted to throw in real quick, too. Thank you, Joe, for everything you and PPN and the 3%ers are doing up there for the Constitution. we're hoping to see maybe you and Jeff and Tracy Roberts and some of you down here in February about getting a group going maybe for Jefferson, and looking forward to working with you guys to make that happen. And again, thank you for putting yourself there. It means a lot to a lot of us.
Yeah, and if there's any way we can help you guys out, let us know in the future of getting information out or anything. Please give us a call or get a hold of Red.
I definitely will, and I appreciate the support. It just my motivation is I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I know today she will not enjoy the freedoms and liberties I had when I was 10.
Boy, ain't that the truth.
Yeah.
We cannot be there as a nation. That's not what America is about.
Absolutely. Listen, we're running out of time. Go ahead and play the clip right now, and then we'll talk to you soon, Joe. Take care. Godspeed.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Where
you too.
We can't argue that we're extremely overvalued in the marketplace, yet leveraged types of toxic assets. We have a very serious problem, as 2008 and 1929 showed us. Gold is a currency. It is still, by all evidences, the premier currency where no fiat currency, including the dollar, can match it. And so that the issue is, if you're looking at a question of turmoil, you will find, as we always have in the past, it moves into the gold price. But the gold price is actually sort of half a commodity price. So when the economy is weakening, it goes down like copper. But it's also got a monetary characteristic which is intrinsic. It's not inbred into human beings. I cannot conceive of any mechanism by which you could say that, but it behaves as though it is. Intrinsic currencies like gold and silver, for example, are acceptable without a third-party guarantee. And, for example, at the end of World War II, or just at the end of it, Germany could not import goods without payment in gold. The person who shipped the goods in would accept the gold and didn't care if there's any credit standard associated with that. That is a very rare phenomenon. It's the reason why, for example, in a renewal of an agreement that the central banks have made, European central banks, I believe, about allocating their gold sales, which occurred when gold prices were falling down, that has been renewed this year with a statement that gold serves a very important place in monetary reserves. And the question is, why do central banks put money into an asset which has no rate of return, but cost of storage and insurance and everything else like that? Why are they doing that? If you look at the data, with a very few exceptions, all of the developed countries have gold reserves.
Yeah, that's Alan Greenspan. Gee, I wonder why they all end up moving into precious metals in times of turmoil. Yeah,
not that they would know
maybe
something.
that you should take that as a warning from a central banker. So anyway, we're at the end of the show here, and we've covered everything. Now, we've got more that we could always cover, and we wish we could get to it all, but it's just there's just too much out there, and things are moving at 100 miles an hour. You were born an original. Don't die a copy. Remember, our amateurs built the Ark and professionals built the Titanic. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force, and force, like fire, is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. You've been listening to Sovereign Mind Radio, where we put principles above parties.